Matt here. Today I'm making a video describing drugs and what you're going to come across if you start working in the mental health space, and sort of understanding where they fit culturally. So how I have the bizarrely large cultural understanding about drugs and the drug market in Australia. So as a hobby, what I used to do when I was younger is that I used to kind of try and become sort of ingratiate myself and spend time with different cultural groups. Sometimes it would be the Muslims at the mosque. Sometimes it would be people who were part of organized crime and selling things they really shouldn't be. And we're not talking about weed, we're talking about stuff they really fucking shouldn't be touching. And that was my hobby. Never got into the drug trade in any way which anyone should be worried about. But I have a large cultural vocabulary regarding these things. What happens is that I then transferred that skill to doing support work, where I worked with people coming out of gangs and that kind of thing. Had to work with organized crimes at different points. And now what I've been doing is that I provide the strategy and training for people who work with vulnerable populations where there is drug use. I've worked with people, the strategies for managing people coming out of detention for different drugs. We're talking about the more hardcore stuff where it starts defining your life rather than it just being a little bit of a habit thing. I mean like the really class A kind of heroin, like that kind of shit. But getting back to the main point, understanding drugs in a cultural context. So, first of all, why do young men band together in gangs? So gangs exist. They're kind of held together by two things. One's kind of like what I describe as a cultural anthropological component. The other part is just money, right? A significant part of it is money, but often, and this is the biggest thing. It's usually just a group of young kids, not young kids, blokes up to their early 20s, because what I've noticed is that often people will kind of fall out of that kind of lifestyle just because something better comes up. Most of the people I've met who have been involved in that low-level kind of, well, let's call it grassroots, okay? Like, these are the wholesome gangs. This isn't the Mexican drug cartel. This is the more wholesome, homegrown, little rogue element, you know? So people in that group, often they'll have learning disabilities. Often, or they've found that the drug use that they need that they've been using to medicate their mental illness has meant that they've had to become part of this wider drug network. So, for example, if someone might have OCD, they need Xanax, or they've been using Xanax or something similar to be able to calm their OCD so they become less violent. Unfortunately, the only way that they're able to get a steady supply of this drug is to be involved in this distribution network. And that might be a good way of thinking of it. So think of it as like a wider distribution network, and that you'll have these little homegrown grassroots gangs kind of splitting up about it. Now, that is what the majority of what we can loosely describe as organized crime in Australia looks like, okay? That's the good kind. It's just boys, and I think that's the best way that we should describe it, who have found it community because they'll take care of each other. I've been into some very well-maintained homes of people who are quite well involved in this stuff, right? It can be bizarrely good for them and their mental health until they go to prison, but that's kind of what that's like. And they usually don't go to prison. So We'll contrast that with the second group, which is a more hierarchical drug distribution network in a moment. But let me describe why they don't tend to go to prison. Because most of the time, right, from a policing perspective, and this is when I see police acting competently, is that they see these phenomenon as things that they have to control for. They're not things that they want to wipe out. So it's a social drug use, community around drug use, and the market violence which occurs because of drug use. The difference between what we describe as a corporation and a business, and a legitimate business and a non-legitimate business, is that a legitimate business is functioning in a legal framework where they are able to get their needs met without violence. If you're dealing with if you have an issue, if you're Big W and you have an issue with one of the other stores next to you who are, stealing your customers or something, or they're stealing your product, or they're doing something probably, I'm struggling to come up with a good example, but you'll be able to solve that in the court. You can't go to the magistrate court and say, this cunt stole my drugs, right? I want my drugs back, right? Or this guy said that this drug was going to be 100% pure and it's chock full of fucking chalk, right? You can't do that. So what ends up happening is that, if there's an issue, there has the potential to be violence. And that's the other thing why young boys doing these things. There's a lot of posturing, and there's kind of like a little bit of a fantasy or ideology which I've seen go on with it. I remember this guy coming out, showing me at one time being shown all these different weapons that these kids had. And I was like, you've never used that, mate. It's like they're almost like props. A lot of the time, it's an opportunity for men to enjoy kind of like a masculinity of some kind. And so that's what they'll do. If they jump someone, they're probably not going to bash them unless it's really bad with those weapons. Sometimes they do though. That's not great when that happens. But getting back to the story, so that's what we would expect in that kind of wholesome grassroots kind of gang. What's not wholesome is when you have that hierarchy, because what ends up happening is that you end up having gang discipline, and you get people who are sort of causing real fucking problems, right? So this is when the police do need to step in. Okay, so a lot of the time, remember, the people who end up in gangs, low socioeconomic background, often have a learning disability or a mental illness. Okay, right? Who wants to be the person who's throwing those kids in jail? Really, who wants to be doing that? Right? What you want to be going after are these more hierarchical structures. So if you have, say, a proper bikie gang. Actually, let's not do a bikie gang. Let's do something like an offshoot of the Bloods or something. So what you'll have is that you'll usually have a guy, and it's usually a guy around 30 years old. Sometimes they're older than that. They're usually not too much younger, because by the time you're managing, you're actually intimidating people, you're actually and you're doing the work to be, say, the manager of a criminal group, you have to have been in this lifestyle a little bit longer. You need to have been inoculated to violence. You see, you need to be able to kill a cunt. So by that point, you're looking, and that kind of structure, you'll have a person who owns the enterprise, or a group of people who own the enterprise. You'll have distributors below that, and under the distributor you'll have the dealers. In general, with this kind of stuff, distributor and up tend to be very bad people. Drug dealers are often, they can be just the bloke that you work with at Target, right? The bloke that you work with at Target, he's doing this extra thing because this is his second little side hustle he's doing on the side. He's well connected, he likes to party. That's what your dealer is, and that's usually a person that you don't really want bad things to happen to. When you get to the distribution level, things get fucky, because when a distributor is someone who is working with suppliers or a high level distributor to get the drugs in and then start divvying them up to dealers down the bottom. When you're a distributor, what's happening is that you're now working towards, you're very much ingrained in the market, and at that level people start looking at territory. Okay, so we've gone from employee, the drug dealer down the bottom, and we're looking at management now. So they're looking more strategically at what's going on. And in that situation, that's when you get people knifing each other. It's when it's distributors and up. Now, in general, because all of these substances are illegal, and because there isn't the ability to resolve things through the courts, the way issues are dealt with illegal substances is through violence. And what that means is that all illegal substances will have that, even things like marijuana. That's why it's very important to have harm reduction methods available, even for people that we might suspect as having issues with marijuana, such as Alternaleaf and these other legal weed distribution methods. Okay, because it takes away from that, like this market, from this place where violence is used as a means of business. Now, the trade of marijuana in general has a much lower level of violence than other substances. It's still there. For example, cigarettes, the illegal importation of cigarettes and the illegal sale of cigarettes in Australia, there is violence around that. Okay? That's cigarettes. There's violence around weed. Like, even though it's the chillest substance ever, there is violence around it. But there's a lot less violence. You go up to something like meth. Okay, so if you're say a drug dealer or a distributor who's handling meth, what's going to happen is that you're going to have people coming up to your door at different times of the day and night wanting their fix, because it's such a powerful dopamine agonist. Now, what happens with that is that, and you're going to have sums of money lying around, and you're always going to be a target. People are going to want your money, or they're going to want your drugs. And that's where things are always bad, right? Anything such as, violence is more associated with meth and those hardcore things than it is for things like marijuana. Now, anyway, that's most of the brief I want to put to this subject today. The other thing I would say is that you need to look at things such as membership in limited organised crime and membership and substance use as cultural phenomenon rather than as bad behaviour. There's going to be things that those groups are getting out of it. What we want to do is that we want to find alternative behaviours for people to go through for these things. Like, instead of engaging in drug use, in having their community through thuggish violence, right? Maybe they could join a boxing gym. There are positive outlets for these things. The other thing I'd say is that, so depending on your neighborhood, smoking marijuana might be a very common thing, and it's just a cultural practice in that community. If you go to some different communities, they're a lot more uptight. and they'd see those practices as sort of like as super taboo. A lot of medical practitioners and healthcare practitioners come from that more uptight communities. And to those people, I need you to look at these things as just something people do rather than as a medical problem or a mental health problem. It's the same with, there are a lot of behaviors which kind of feel that. And anyway, that's my take on drugs, politics, the market, and the culture around it. Have a good one.